Ethan Cole, just 17 years old, walked into court and was mocked by the judge in front of everyone. But that smirk vanished when Ethan quoted obscure laws from memory, tore the case apart, and proved the prosecution's star evidence was forged. By the end, the whole courtroom was applauding him. The courtroom was packed. Sunlight filtered through the tall, dusty windows, cutting slanted beams across polished wooden benches. The faint smell of old books and fresh coffee hung in the air. The steady hum of murmured conversations and the occasional rustle of papers blended into a background noise that seemed almost rehearsed. Lawyers shuffled case files, clerks tapped at keyboards, and the bailiff stood like a statue near the judge's bench, hands clasped behind his back. Everyone was waiting for the next case to begin, a zoning dispute that, for most people, sounded boring. But today was different. The energy in the room felt curious, like something unusual was about to happen, though no one could put their finger on it. Then, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the room swung open with a slow creak. Heads turned, one by one, as if the entire room had been choreographed to look in unison. And in walked a teenager. He couldn't have been more than 17. His dark hair was slightly messy, the kind of "I didn't try, but I still look fine" messy. He wore sneakers, not polished leather shoes, not anything remotely professional. Just ordinary, worn-in sneakers. A backpack hung lazily from one shoulder, the straps frayed, as if it had survived years of high school hallways. People began whispering immediately. "Is he lost?" Someone muttered in the second row. "Maybe he's here for jury duty." Another whispered with a laugh. "No way, he's too young for that," came a reply. The teenager didn't seem to notice the stares. His eyes scanned the room for a brief moment, calm and focused, before he stepped forward. At the front of the courtroom, Judge Morrison sat in his high-backed chair, robe neatly pressed, glasses balanced low on his nose. He had the kind of face that always looked slightly annoyed, whether he was or not. He was known in legal circles for his quick wit, his sharp tongue, and, though no one said it to his face, his habit of judging people the moment they walked in. When his gaze landed on the newcomer, one eyebrow lifted ever so slightly. A smirk tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Well, kid," the judge said, his voice carrying that practiced tone of authority mixed with mockery. "This isn't a high school debate club. You're in the wrong place." A few people chuckled under their breath. The teenager didn't flinch, not even a blink. Instead, he walked slowly toward the defense table, his sneakers squeaking faintly against the polished floor. When he reached the table, he set his backpack down with deliberate care. Then, to the surprise of everyone watching, he reached inside, pulled out a neatly folded tie, and looped it around his neck. It wasn't flashy, just a simple, dark blue tie, but the way he adjusted it, straightening it with precision, made it clear he knew exactly what he was doing. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. What was this kid doing? Was this some kind of prank? Judge Morrison tilted his head, amused but also slightly irritated at the disruption. "Do you even know where you are right now?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. The teenager looked up at him and said in a steady, confident voice, "Actually, Your Honor, I'm here for the case." The smirk on the judge's face widened into a grin, as if he had just heard the most ridiculous thing all day. "Oh, you're here for the case, are you?" Morrison repeated, leaning back in his chair. "And which case would that be?" "Someone contesting a cafeteria detention." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even the opposing attorney couldn't help but chuckle. But the teenager's expression didn't change. His eyes stayed locked on the judge. Calm, unshaken. "The State versus Henderson Family Market," he replied simply. "I'm representing the defense." And just like that, silence. The sound drained out of the room so completely that you could hear the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. The laughter froze in people's throats. Even the court reporter, who had been typing nonstop, paused mid-keystroke. The judge blinked. "Excuse me. I'm representing the defense," the teenager repeated, enunciating each word. "I have been authorized to do so, Your Honor." Judge Morrison glanced at the bailiff, as if expecting him to escort the boy out. But instead, the bailiff walked over to the bench and handed the judge a thick manila folder. The judge opened it and began reading. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. His smirk faded, replaced by a look of surprise. The documents were legitimate: bar certification, academic transcripts, and official court approval for the teenager to practice law. His name was printed clearly on every page. Ethan Cole. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a joke. Judge Morrison closed the folder slowly, his gaze returning to the young man standing confidently before him. For the first time since Ethan had walked in, the judge said nothing. The room remained dead silent, every single person waiting to see what would happen next. And Ethan? He simply reached into his backpack again, pulled out a neatly organized stack of legal documents, and began setting them in front of him, ready to work, as if the fact that he was a 17-year-old attorney in a room full of seasoned professionals was nothing unusual at all. Judge Morrison leaned back in his large leather chair, the faint creak of the seat cutting through the silence. He folded his arms and studied the young figure standing before him. "Let me guess," Morrison said, his voice carrying a playful bite. "You're here to watch a family member? Or maybe play in turn for the day?" The teenager didn't shift, didn't fidget, didn't even blink. "No, sir," he replied, his tone measured and respectful. "I'm representing the defense." For a moment, there was silence, and then the courtroom exploded with laughter. The chuckles started in the back row, a wave of disbelief rolling forward until even the front benches joined in. A man in the second row shook his head, muttering, "This kid's got guts." The opposing attorney, a graying man in an expensive navy suit, let out a short, sharp laugh, as if the very idea was too absurd to even entertain. Morrison smirked, leaning forward now, elbows resting on the bench. "This," he said, drawing out the words slowly, "is a courtroom, not a talent show. We don't have time for pranks." The teenager, however, didn't back down. His voice remained steady. "It's not a prank, Your Honor." The smirk on Morrison's face deepened, a look he often wore when he thought he was 2 steps ahead in a conversation. He glanced toward the bailiff, a silent signal to escort the boy out and end this ridiculous interruption. But the bailiff didn't move. Instead, he reached under the judge's bench and pulled out a thick manila folder. With deliberate steps, he crossed the room and placed it in Morrison's hands. The judge, still wearing that amused expression, opened the folder without much urgency, flipping the cover back with one finger, expecting to see a hastily typed letter or some amateur paperwork he could dismiss in a heartbeat. But as his eyes scanned the first page, something in his expression shifted. Inside were official documents, a state-issued bar certification with a gold seal, transcripts from a prestigious law school showing top marks in every course, and letters of recommendation from respected attorneys. The name at the top of every page was clear: Ethan Cole. Morrison's eyes narrowed slightly. He flipped to the next section, more records, more signatures, all perfectly in order. And then, tucked between the pages, a photo of Ethan in a graduation cap and gown, shaking hands with the dean of the law school. The judge's smirk faltered. He sat up straighter now, reading more carefully, his lips moving silently as he verified each date and detail. The law school graduation date, last year. Ethan's birth date, which meant he had graduated at just 16. The murmurs in the courtroom began again, quieter this time, less mocking and more incredulous. The opposing attorney's smile faded into a puzzled frown. He leaned toward his co-counsel and whispered something, both of them now studying the boy like they were seeing him for the first time. Morrison closed the folder slowly, resting it on the bench. For the first time since Ethan had entered the room, the judge didn't have a ready quip. He simply looked at the young attorney standing there, shoulders squared, eyes unwavering. "You're telling me," the judge began, his voice quieter now, "that you graduated law school at 16 and passed the bar exam on your first attempt?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied without hesitation. The judge didn't respond immediately. He took off his glasses, polishing them with a cloth as he glanced toward the defense table. It was empty. No seasoned lawyer, no mentor hovering in the background. Just this teenager, a neatly stacked pile of documents beside him, and the calm confidence of someone who had walked into countless rooms where no one believed in him. Finally, Morrison set his glasses back on his nose and leaned forward. "Well, Counselor Cole," he said, the title sounding almost strange on his tongue, "I suppose we'd better proceed." The air in the room had changed. The laughter was gone. The amusement had been replaced by something heavier, curiosity mixed with disbelief. And in that moment, everyone knew the rest of this hearing wasn't going to go the way they had first imagined. The case on the docket was the State versus Henderson Family Market, a small, family-owned grocery store accused of violating a complex zoning law. On paper, it looked bad for the defense. The statute was full of technical jargon, loopholes, and exceptions that only someone with an expert's grasp of legal codes could navigate. The prosecution seemed confident, almost smug, as if this was already in the bag. But the moment Ethan Cole stood to speak, the mood in the courtroom shifted. He didn't fidget or glance nervously at his papers. Instead, he looked directly at Judge Morrison and began in a calm, steady tone. "Your Honor," he said, "the prosecution's case rests on an incorrect interpretation of Zoning Ordinance Section 14b, subsection 3. At first, some in the room frowned, trying to follow the sudden leap into legal language. But Ethan pressed on, his delivery smooth and precise. Without looking at his notes, he quoted entire sections of the statute from memory, then compared them to two recent appellate court decisions, both of which favored businesses in similar cases. The prosecution's attorney shifted in his seat. And furthermore, Ethan continued, "The initial citation issued to my clients was filed outside the legally permissible timeframe stated in Ordinance 9A, rendering it procedurally defective." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Procedurally defective?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ethan replied confidently. "The city failed to serve the notice within the 30-day window required by law. I have time-stamped records here, obtained directly from the municipal clerk's office." He handed over a neatly organized folder, each document tabbed and highlighted. The prosecution tried to object, but Ethan countered instantly, citing Rule 6.02 of court procedure, which allowed the evidence despite their protest. His timing was flawless, not a pause too long, not a word wasted. Judge Morrison began asking sharp questions, testing the young attorney's knowledge. Ethan answered each one without hesitation, his tone respectful yet firm. By now, the atmosphere in the courtroom had completely changed. The audience, who had expected a quick and predictable case, was leaning forward in their seats. Even the court reporter occasionally glanced up from her machine, her fingers hovering for a moment before continuing to type. The prosecution's earlier confidence had evaporated. The young man in sneakers wasn't just defending the Hendersons. He was dismantling the case piece by piece. Though no one dared say it aloud, a single thought was starting to take root in everyone's mind. The Hendersons might actually win this. Halfway through the hearing, the prosecution stood with a certain swagger. They had been waiting for this moment, their slam dunk piece of evidence. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said confidently, "this document clearly proves that the Henderson family market was issued a legal notice, which they deliberately ignored." He walked to the judge's bench, holding a crisp sheet of paper in a clear plastic sleeve. It bore an official header, a neatly typed statement, and at the bottom, a bold, handwritten signature. The audience shifted in their seats, sensing a decisive blow to the defense. Ethan accepted the copy handed to him without a word. He studied it quietly for a few seconds, eyes scanning every detail. Then, almost imperceptibly, the corner of his mouth lifted in a slight smile. He rose from his chair. "Your Honor," he said evenly, "this document is inadmissible." The room froze. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "And why is that, Counselor?" Ethan stepped toward the bench, holding the paper delicately between two fingers. "Because," he said, "this signature is not original. It has been copied and pasted from another document." A low murmur swept through the courtroom. Morrison narrowed his eyes. "That's a serious accusation. You'd better explain." Ethan nodded. "The signature at the bottom appears authentic at first glance, but if you examine it closely, the font spacing of the typed line above it is uneven, a sign of image insertion. Furthermore, the edges of the signature are pixelated in a way inconsistent with the rest of the document. This suggests it was scanned from a different source and placed here digitally." The judge glanced down at the paper, holding it closer to the light. The pixelation was faint, but it was there. "I can also prove," Ethan continued, "that this signature belongs to a completely unrelated document." He reached into his file folder and produced another sheet, an original notice from the city archives, obtained from the public records database. The signature on it was identical, down to the smallest ink blot. "They didn't even change it," Ethan said, his voice calm but sharp. "They used the exact same image file." Gasps erupted from the audience. One woman in the back covered her mouth. The court reporter actually paused mid-keystroke, staring at Ethan. The prosecutor's confident expression collapsed. His face drained of color. "Your Honor, save it." Morrison cut in, his tone stern now. "We'll address this after a recess." He banged his gavel sharply. Court is in recess for 20 minutes. As the judge rose and left the bench, the tension in the room was electric. Everyone knew what this meant. The prosecution's case had just taken a devastating hit, and the teenager in sneakers had delivered the blow. When court resumed after the recess, the atmosphere in the room had completely changed. Judge Morrison walked in, his expression far more serious than before. The light-hearted smirk that had marked their earlier exchanges was gone. He adjusted his robe, settled into his chair, and looked directly at Ethan. "Counselor Cole," he said formally, "please continue." The title, counselor, carried a new weight now. No one in the courtroom was laughing anymore. The audience leaned forward, eager to hear what the teenager would say next. Ethan began methodically, his tone calm but commanding. He revisited every major point in the prosecution's argument, dismantling them one by one. The zoning ordinance they claimed the Hendersons had violated? He clarified that it didn't apply to businesses of their size, citing a state amendment passed just months earlier. The supposed eyewitness testimony? He revealed that the witness had signed a sworn statement 2 years prior that directly contradicted their current story. And, of course, there was the fraudulent document, the prosecution's so-called smoking gun, which Ethan had already exposed as a fake. Without that, their case was left in tatters. The prosecutor tried to push back, but each objection was met with Ethan's calm rebuttal, backed by precise legal citations. His command over the facts was so complete that even Judge Morrison occasionally glanced at him with something like admiration. Minutes turned into an hour, and by the time Ethan gave his closing statement, there was no doubt in anyone's mind which side had the stronger case. He concluded simply, "Your Honor, the evidence not only fails to prove wrongdoing, it proves that my clients have been unfairly targeted. I respectfully ask the court to dismiss all charges." The judge sat back, hands folded, and took a long pause before speaking. "I've heard enough. The charges against the Henderson family market are dismissed in their entirety." Gasps of relief came from the defense table. Mrs. Henderson wiped tears from her eyes while her husband squeezed Ethan's shoulder in gratitude. Judge Morrison leaned forward, his voice softer now. "Counselor Cole, I owe you an apology. I underestimated you." Ethan smiled politely. "It's okay, Your Honor. Most people do, until they listen." For a moment, the courtroom was still, and then, breaking tradition, applause erupted from the audience. Some stood to clap, others simply smiled in disbelief. Even a few members of the jury, no longer bound by silence, joined in. It wasn't just a victory for the Hendersons. It was a moment that proved skill, preparation, and determination could shatter expectations, no matter the age of the person behind the argument. Ethan gathered his files, shook hands with the grateful family, and walked out of the courtroom with the quiet confidence of someone who knew this was only the beginning. News of the teen attorney who outsmarted the court spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within hours, snippets of the courtroom transcript were circulating online. By the next morning, major news outlets were running headlines like, "17-year-old lawyer stuns judge, wins case, teen legal prodigy exposes courtroom fraud." The boy who beat the system, clips from inside the courthouse, went viral on social media. People replayed the moment Ethan revealed the fraudulent document, zooming in on the stunned expressions of the prosecutor and even Judge Morrison. Comment sections flooded with admiration. "This kid's going to be on the Supreme Court one day. Age doesn't define brilliance. I wish I had this level of confidence at 17. Ethan's story began trending nationwide. Local TV stations requested interviews, podcasts reached out, and even law professors started referencing him in lectures about courtroom strategy. But beyond the fame and the headlines, something deeper resonated with people. Ethan had broken a stereotype that most people didn't even realize they carried. The assumption that youth equals inexperience, and that only age can bring competence. Even Judge Morrison, a man not known for public humility, spoke openly about the experience in a televised interview a week later. Sitting behind his desk, he leaned toward the camera and said, "That young man taught me a valuable lesson that day. Brilliance has no age limit. I looked at him and saw a kid. I should have been looking at him and seeing a professional. I won't make that mistake again. It was a rare admission from a man with decades on the bench. As for Ethan, the sudden attention didn't seem to change him. When reporters asked if he planned to cash in on his newfound fame, he shook his head. "I didn't do this for publicity," he said. "I did it because the Hendersons were being treated unfairly. That's what matters." He went back to his studies, quietly working on his next cases, splitting his time between academic research and representing clients who couldn't afford big-name legal teams. Word spread in legal circles that if you needed someone who could outthink the opposition, you called Ethan Cole, no matter how unconventional it seemed to have a teenager leading the charge. Friends described him as laser-focused, rarely distracted by the hype. "He knows what he wants," one classmate said, "and what he wants is justice." The Hendersons, forever grateful, kept a framed photo of Ethan in their shop. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "The day the kid won the case." And that's the incredible story of how a 17-year-old attorney turned an entire courtroom upside down. It's a powerful reminder that talent, preparation, and determination can come from anyone, no matter their age or appearance. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want to hear more real-life courtroom moments like this. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you have done if you were in Ethan's place? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.